So we're really fortunate to have the human life that we have with all the ideal conditions that we need, both external conditions and internal ones related to our own body and mind. So all the ideal conditions to be able to learn the Dharma that shows us how to transform our mind from being confused, unhappy, sometimes overwhelmed by negative emotions, disturbing emotions, often difficult even to make ourselves happy, much less others, helping others to be happy. But we can transform ourselves from this situation and gradually become more and more peaceful, clear, positive, helpful to others as well as to ourselves, and eventually reach the state of full awakening, Buddhahood, the most pure and perfect state of mind possible, able to help all living beings to also be free of suffering and reach awakening. So we have this potential. The Dharma, the Buddha's teachings show us how we can actualize this potential. So we're really fortunate that we have this situation of a human life and all the other conditions we need to be able to learn about this path and start practicing it, start following it, start going in the direction of enlightenment. So feel how precious this situation is and aspire to use it in the most beneficial way possible, both for yourself and for others. And also aspire that what we are doing here this morning, listening, thinking about, meditating on these teachings, that this will be a cause for us to get closer to enlightenment, to help all other beings. So yesterday we were looking at things we can do to be more prepared for death. And some of you may feel like there was a lot of information, maybe overwhelming. And where do I start? We have just this limited time this weekend to look at this subject, which is really huge. And realistically, we do need time to absorb this material, think about it, reflect on it, ask ourselves, well, how does this relate to me? How does it fit in with my life? What can I do about it? So give yourself time to do that. Don't expect you can absorb everything and practice everything right from the beginning. So like in my own case, I started learning Buddhism, 45, 46, 47 years ago. And, I feel like I'm still learning, still trying to integrate it in my life. It is massive, just the amount of ideas and material and so on. And so it definitely does take time. So give yourself time. Review the notes that you've taken, if you have taken any notes during this course, and review the materials that were given to you. And there's lots of other books as well, and teachings, courses, and so on this topic. So take time to explore these, learn more about them, think about them, and slowly they will start to make more sense, and you will be able to start integrating them more in your life. And it's really beneficial. That's my experience. These teachings are really precious. And so this morning, I'd like to talk about the 8 stages. We've already kind of mentioned these a few times. So to go through these 8 stages, this is helpful. Maybe for some people it wouldn't be helpful, but for some people it is helpful just to have an idea of what happens as we die. Because often fear happens because we don't know what's going to happen. You know, the expression fear of the unknown. So death is kind of an unknown situation. Nobody, well, except for people who have near-death experiences and come back and talk about their experiences, but they haven't gone all the way. They haven't actually gone the full way to death and come back. So we don't have that advantage of having people who've gone on that journey and then come back and told us about it. So that can be one factor why there's fear and anxiety about death. Like, what's going to happen? What is it going to be like? And then our mind can create all kinds of worst case scenarios that it's going to be absolutely horrible. But we don't know for sure. Like Socrates said, we don't really know what it's going to be like. So, but then in the Tibetan tradition, in particular, it's in Tantra, Vajrayana. And within Vajrayana, there's 4 classes of Tantra. And the 4th one is called Highest Yoga Tantra. So in that body of teachings and practices, there's an explanation of the dying process, what is actually happening as a person dies. And this is a little bit complicated because it's based on an explanation of different levels of our body and mind. So it's said that we have a gross level of our body and mind, the gross level being like this body of flesh and bones and whatnot, all that stuff. That's our gross body. But we have a subtle body, and the subtle body consists of channels, energy channels that run through our body. There's a whole system of these, which you've probably heard about before because it's often used in Chinese medicine, for example. And in Hinduism, they also have the awareness of this subtle body. And there's also chakras, energy centers that are mainly located in the center of our body. Like the heart chakra, that's the main one. So that's right kind of here in the center of our chest. It's not the heart, the organ heart, but it's an energy center here in our chest. And we also have another one in the top of our head and in our throat and so on. So these various chakras that are centers of energy. And then there's also what are called winds, energy winds or airs, which travel through the channels in our body. The main channel is said to be the central channel, which runs right through the middle of our body from the crown of our head to the base of our spine, in front of the spine, but straight through. So that's said to be the main channel. But then there's all these branch channels that go out to all the parts of our body. So this is a subtle body. It can't be seen. So when doctors operate and open you up, they're not going to see these things. They're not going to see your central channel or your heart chakra or any of those things. So they're subtle. So that's the subtle body. And then there's also the very subtle body, which is actually the winds, the energy winds. I made a mistake there. Those are included in the very subtle body rather than the subtle body. So the energy winds, especially, I'll talk about that later. But anyway, there's these energy winds that run through our body. So those are the 3 levels of our body. And if you want to know more about this subject, one good source, I think it's on the reading list, is a book by Robert Thurman. It's a translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. There's a number of translations of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but in his book he has a very lengthy introduction in which he explains these different levels of body and mind. So you can find that in there. And then Mind. Okay, so mind also has these different levels. There's the gross level of our mind. The gross level of our mind is our sensory experiences, like our five senses: seeing, hearing, smell, taste, tactile. Okay, so those experiences, which probably constitute most of the experiences we have all day long, always looking at things, seeing things, and hearing sounds, and smelling odors, and feeling sensations in our body. So those kinds of experiences are part of our mind, and they're the gross level of our mind. And the gross level of mind also includes gross thoughts, our normal thoughts, planning and remembering and fantasizing and dreading and, all these kind of thoughts that are going on sometimes nonstop all day long. So that's the gross level of mind. And then there's a subtle level of the mind, which we'll go through as we explain the 8 stages. Because what happens is we die, both the gross level of the body, the gross level of the mind kind of absorb or dissolve or cease to function. So the mind in particular goes from a gross level to a subtle level, and then the very subtle. The very subtle level of the mind is what's called clear light. You may have heard of that. Dalai Lama talks about it a lot. The clear light level of the mind. That's the most subtle level of the mind. And at the very end of the process of dying, we're in that state. We're in the state of this clear light mind. So that's just a rough explanation of what's going on when a person dies. But, and again, this information is found in the highest yoga tantra, because in that level of practice, this is a very advanced level of meditation practice, you actually make use of this process of dying, and a yogi who's doing those practices will simulate the process of dying and get to the point where they can actually work with the subtler energies of the body and mind, and even get to the point where they can experience the very subtle mind of clear light. Now, why they want to do that is because that is the most clear, pure state of mind that we could possibly have. And if you can make that manifest, in other words, you can get into that state of the very subtle mind of clear light, and then use that to meditate on emptiness. You already have to have understood emptiness and have a realization of emptiness. But if you've gotten to that point, then you combine those two things, the very subtle mind of clear light and your realization of emptiness. And if you can do that, I mean, it's not at all easy. It's a very rare person who's able to do this. But if you can do that, then you have a good chance of reaching enlightenment in a very short time. Even in this lifetime, and if not during this life, then during the process of dying, when you actually do experience the clear light. And then you can combine that with the realization of emptiness and totally transform your mind into enlightened mind. So that's why this topic is important in that level of Tantra. But anyway, we're not at that point yet. So we're just looking at the 8 stages. And it is helpful to know about these 8 stages because we do go through them. Everybody who dies will go through these 8 stages. So if we know something about it, then we might be able to be aware of these stages as they're happening and just recognize, oh, now this is happening, now that's happening. And then it won't be so unfamiliar and frightening to us. So, okay, let's go through these. So this is letter H in your outline, if you have that. The 8 stages of the death process. So there are these 8 stages. On the first 4 stages, the mind is still on the gross level. The gross level of mind includes sensory experiences, our 5 senses, and gross thoughts, our normal everyday blah, blah, blah. These gradually diminish over these 4 stages. And then there are different things that occur, different physical sensations that occur, and also different occurrences that happen on the level of the mind. So this is just a kind of summary of some of those main experiences. And it's also said that as we go through these different stages, especially the first 4 stages, the elements of the body absorb. So in Asian cultures, I don't think this is found in Western cultures, but there's this method of explaining things in terms of 4 elements. It's actually said that all physical matter, our bodies and also everything in the world around us, is made up of these 4 elements. And the first is usually the earth element. So on the first level, or the first stage of the death process, the earth element absorbs. So the earth element doesn't mean like dirt, but it's the quality of solidity. So every part of our body actually has this quality of solidity. It's most easily seen in the hard things like our fingernails and our bones and our teeth. You know, there's a lot of earth element in those things. But it's also in our skin and our blood. So it's a quality in all the parts of our body. And as this absorbs, as the earth element absorbs, our body loses strength, becomes thinner and weaker, and we feel drained of energy. It becomes difficult to sit upright or to hold anything. If you've ever been with somebody who's dying, you can observe this. You know, it's like they just can't move, and you might even notice they seem to kind of shrink a bit. Yeah? The body looks smaller. So these are external signs of the earth element absorbing or dissolving. And another thing that happens is the coloring of the body fades. The person starts to look more pale, losing the color in their cheeks and so on. Cheeks become sunken. And then at this stage, the eye consciousness, our eyesight, our vision decreases. It says our eyesight becomes unclear, and it becomes difficult to open and close the eyes. And actually, I think you can even lose your sense of seeing. You may not be able to see anymore at all. So these are outer signs that indicate the first stage of the death process. And for the person themselves, internally, there's this image, a vision of a mirage, a kind of silvery blue mirage. So you may have seen a mirage like in the desert or on a road in a very hot sun, this kind of shimmering appearance. So these are signs, outer and inner signs, indicating the first stage. And there's no definite amount of time that it takes to go through these 8 stages. It varies according to different factors, such as the cause of death. If you're dying slowly over a period of days, then these 8 stages could happen over a period of days. But if death is sudden, like in a car accident or heart attack, then they'd go really quickly. You go through these 8 stages quite quickly. So, at some point, the second stage will occur. And on this stage, the water element absorbs. So the water element doesn't just mean like, water that comes out of our tap and so on, but it's fluidity and movement and cohesion. Air is movement. Cohesion, sticking together. I think of like when you're making bread or cake or something and you have this dry flour and, the bits of flour are separate from each other, but then as soon as you put some liquid in, they all stick together. So we do have in our body the water elements, such as all the fluids in our body, like saliva, blood, what else? Urine, yeah. Actually, don't they say something like 70% of our body is water? 90%. Yeah, all the cells. The cells have a lot of water. So there's a huge amount of water, liquid, in our body. And the quality of cohesion, that's what the water element is about. So as the water element absorbs, we start to feel dry. Our eyes, our mouth, our throat. Again, you might notice this if you're with someone who's dying. They're drying up. So they may feel very dry and thirsty and want something to drink. And it becomes difficult to move the tongue. And our sense of hearing weakens. The person might even not be able to hear anymore. And the ringing in the ears ceases. They say all during our life, there's always some sound in our ears. I don't know if you probably notice that, especially if you go up in the forest here. Sometimes you go up there and there's no sound at all. No planes, no birds, no cars, no sound. Then you're ringing in your ears, especially if you have tinnitus. It becomes very obvious. So even that sound ceases. So even the inner sound ceases. And our mind may become hazy, frustrated, nervous. And the inner vision experienced in the person's mind is, they say it's like smoke. If you go into a room where people have been smoking or incense has been burning, and you see this kind of haze of smoke in the room. So they say it's something like that. Number 3, here the fire element absorbs. So fire here doesn't literally mean flames like we have in the fireplace, but heat. So it's the quality of heat. So again, there's heat in our body. The normal temperature of the body is something like 98, 97, 98. That's pretty warm, right? So that's just natural heat existing in our body. And it's also necessary for digestion. Heat is needed to be able to digest food. So that the fire element, the heat in our body, absorbs. And at this stage, our mouth and nose dry up completely. The warmth of the body begins to disappear, starts to get more cold, usually from the extremities, the feet, the hands, and the heart is usually the last place where there's heat in the body. We can no longer eat, drink, or digest anything. This is something also we notice with people who are dying. They lose their appetite and even don't want to drink anymore. And digestion isn't functioning. And then on the mental level, our mind alternates between clarity and confusion. I've heard people talk about that when they're with someone who's dying. Sometimes they're clear, fully aware of what's going on. Other times they're lost in some other state, confused. And here we start to forget. Even the names of people, family, friends, we may not even recognize them. So they might be right there beside you, but you look at them and sometimes when I talk about this, people say, oh, this can happen long before death. Especially if the person has Alzheimer's or, what's the other one? Dementia, yeah. So there's certain conditions where even years before death, people can forget the names of close loved ones, even their own children. Then our sense of smell weakens, can no longer smell odors, and our breathing becomes difficult. Breathing in becomes weak, and breathing out becomes stronger and longer. It's hard to breathe in, but long breaths going out. And the inner vision at this point is shimmering lights. They say it's a bit like sparks. If there's a bonfire outside at night and all these sparks are flying up in the air, or fireflies, if you've ever seen those. I don't think we have fireflies in California, do we? But over on the East Coast, they do. So these little sparks of light in space. And then the fourth stage, the air element absorbs. So air is the quality of movement. And so at this stage, we can no longer move our limbs. Our body becomes immobile. Our mind becomes bewildered, unaware of the outside world. So you're really sinking, your mind is really sinking into itself, losing touch with the outer world. Everything becomes a blur. Our last feeling of contact with the environment is slipping away. And here the last two of our senses, taste and touch, tactile, feelings in the body dissolves. This is what we were talking about the other day, that at a certain point in the death process, you're not going to feel pain anymore. So that would be at this stage, no more tactile sensations. And we may have visions at this point, frightening ones if we did negative things in our life, or beautiful, joyful ones if we did good things. Yeah, so or both. Maybe they alternate. Like Venerable Jigme told the other day of the young man who saw a staircase in his room. I remember when I was in Singapore too, there was a young man who died of cancer, and I visited him shortly before he died, and his family said that he was talking about seeing a beautiful, colorful parrot in his room. There was no parrot there, but he saw it. Hopefully that was a good sign, something beautiful. And then, so at this point, our breathing, which is already had become difficult, it now stops altogether. So this is the point at which the breath stops. You take one last in-breath, out-breath, and then that's it. No more breathing. So this would be usually, the point where a person is declared dead. They're not breathing anymore, and there would also not be any more signs of life, like the heart, brain, other organs. No more functioning of these organs. So, according to most cultures and doctors and scientists and so on, a person at this point would be declared dead. But according to this tradition, they're not really dead because the consciousness is still inside the body. And it will be for another 4 stages. So that's why in Buddhist families and cultures and so on, we don't immediately take the body away as soon as the breath stops. We leave the body there for as long as possible until the signs of consciousness leaving have appeared. So the last thoughts, gross thoughts, now cease. No more gross thinking. And there's an inner vision of a dim red-blue light, or the last flickering of a candle flame that is about to go out. So if you have like a candle or an oil lamp and the fuel is almost exhausted, there's that last kind of burst of flame before it goes out. Something like that. So our gross thoughts and sensory experiences have now ceased. So there's none of the 5 senses are happening. No seeing, hearing, smell, taste, touch. No more gross thoughts like the thoughts we normally have about our life, our memories, our plans, this, that, who I am, who my mother is, who my child is, and that all those have stopped. Breathing has ceased, and there's no more movement in the brain or circulatory system. over the next 4 stages of the death process, the mind becomes more and more subtle. So mind is still there inside the body, and now it's going into the subtle level. So the next 3 stages are the subtle level of mind, and they're usually named by the kind of appearance you have, the kind of vision you have. So number 5 is white vision. Now this is happening due to movements within the body, movements of what are called drops, which don't ask me to explain. I don't fully understand, but it's a whole system in highest yoga tantra. But while those are happening, the drops are moving inside the body, in particular in the central channel, then these appearances happen. So the first is called the white vision, or luminance is the more technical term. Sometimes it's called white appearance. At the beginning of this stage, gross conceptual consciousness absorbs. So all our gross conceptions absorb. There's a mention of 80 kinds of conceptions that you can find a list of them in different complications. But anyway, 80 kinds of conceptions that absorb. And due to this, we have a vision of a very clear, empty sky, like the sky in autumn filled with the brightness of the full moon. So that's how it's described. And people sometimes say, well, how do we know these things? How does anybody know these things are happening? I think it's probably because of yogis, meditators, who have developed their mind to a very, very high degree, such that they have total awareness of what's happening every moment. And so they're aware of all these occurrences that are happening, and they go through the full death process, and then maybe in the next life they have total recall of it and they can describe what happened. Or also in meditation, because you can simulate these experiences in your meditation practice. You can simulate the death process. So on the basis of that, they can describe that this is what's happening. So anyway, it's like a vast empty space with only this whiteness, this kind of white luminance appearing. So this is, again, the subtle level of mind beneath our usual gross experiences. The next one is called red vision, similar to before, but the color of the space is kind of reddish. They say it's like sunset. Sometimes when the sun is setting, there's this reddish, coppery colored light in the sky. So they say it's similar to that. And again, the redness is due to movement of certain of these drops within the body. The 7th is called the black vision. And this is an appearance of total darkness. So again, it's like vast, empty space, but no light, no color, just dark. So maybe you can imagine walking into a pitch black room where there's no light at all. And, it's just totally black, so you can't see anything. So that's the first part of it. And then it changes into a momentary loss of consciousness. So the mind just kind of faints or swoons, becomes unconscious for a moment. Then you arise from that into stage 8, which is the clear light vision. So this is the most subtle level of the mind, called clear light. And the appearance, the experience is again like that of sky, completely free of any clouds or pollution or anything, just totally vast and clear, and filled with a clear, colorless light. Not white or red or black, just clear. So again, this is said to be the most subtle level of our mind, the most sort of clear and there's no thoughts, no blah blah blah, no sensory experiences to distract the mind. So if someone has understood emptiness, realized emptiness, and they're able to be aware when they reach this state, then they can use this state of mind, the very subtle mind, to meditate on emptiness. Because I think my understanding is this is the closest experience to a direct realization of emptiness that we could have naturally. Okay, so it's a chance to really get a strong experience of emptiness, of inherent existence, but only if you have already understood emptiness. So just by going through this stage doesn't mean you're going to realize emptiness. Okay, somebody who's totally untrained, hasn't tried to understand emptiness, they're not going to realize emptiness at this point. It's only if you've already realized it. And then a yogi, such a meditator who's trained a lot during their life, is able to keep their mind in this state for a period of time, sometimes days or weeks. Yesterday we were talking about Kamtrul Rinpoche, and I looked it up, and he did pass away 30th of December, just a few months ago, and it said that he remained in Tukdam for a week. So the term they use is Tukdam. What does that actually mean? Tuk is heart, right?
Yeah. Dharma means Dharma. I mean,
Holy?
something like that. I mean, holy, excellent, purest, the purest form of meditation, you could say.
Oh, okay, so the purest form or purest state of mind or purest form of mind or heart that you could have. Yeah, so that's the term that's used for when, I guess usually a lama. I don't know if you'd use it for ordinary people. Yeah? Anybody?
Yeah.
Anybody who is able to remain in the clear light state for a period of time, meditating on emptiness. They call that tukdam. So he remained in that state for a week. And you hear stories of others who stay in it for a few days. Ling Rinpoche, the Dalai Lama's senior tutor, stayed in it for 13 days. So sometimes the person will be sitting up in meditation. Sometimes they're lying down. But while they're in that state, there's no breathing, no sign of life. You know, a doctor would say this person's dead. But what normally happens when somebody dies, the body starts to, well, it kind of collapses, right? And starts to decompose and have a bad smell, right? That's the usual story. But while a person is in tukdam, that doesn't happen. The body remains fresh. I haven't actually seen it, but this is what they say. The body still looks fresh, sometimes even radiant. There's no bad smell. And they can, if they're in meditation, they can remain sitting up in meditation. And then the people around them would not do anything to disturb. They would keep the atmosphere quiet, not touch the body, and so on. But ordinary people who don't have such ability to be aware during the clear light and use that state of mind, there's no certainty how long they would stay in that state. They say it could be a couple of hours, it could be a couple of days. I had some friends in California who, it was a Dharma community, and one of the members died. She was only about 40, not very old, but she had cancer. So she died in her home, and the people in the community stayed with her. They took turns staying with her 24 hours a day. And they said that, it was about 3 days before the signs of the mind leaving the body occurred. And they said during that time, there was no smell, and they had the feeling, one of my friends told me, it felt like she was still there. You could really feel her presence there. But then later, when the consciousness left, it was like, she's gone. She's not there anymore. So it could be a couple of days. And that's why they say it's best, if possible, to not disturb the body. Just leave the body. Because if the body is disturbed, it could disturb the mind and possibly make the mind turn into some not so good state and affect the next rebirth. So it's really best, if you can, to not disturb the body. And then people, of course, wonder, well, how do you know when the consciousness has left the body? They say that there's some liquid that comes out either from the nostrils or from the sexual organ. So I've heard that verified. They'll sometimes see something coming out of the nostrils. And that indicates that the consciousness has left the body, and then you can move it and do whatever needs to be done. So generally, it's best, if you can, to leave the body undisturbed until you see those signs. I think another sign is heat. They say there'll still be a little bit of heat around the heart chakra. And when the consciousness has left, then no more heat. That area becomes cold. Any other? Well, the smell, I guess. The body starts to smell, then that's... Is there a microphone?
Also, the sign of rigor mortis would not be present, so the limbs, etc., would still be very malleable, and you could move them. But once rigor mortis sets in, then you really can't move the limbs anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess the body would still be kind of soft and flexible, well, as long as the consciousness is there. Yeah. So then once the consciousness does leave the body, on the level of consciousness itself, it will pass back through these 8 stages in reverse order. So that means it goes from the clear light to the black appearance, to the red appearance, to the white appearance, to the da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so as that's happening, then the sensory consciousnesses are also starting to arise. And as soon as this happens, when the consciousness goes from the clear light to the black appearance, the person is in the intermediate state, the Bardo state. And in the Bardo state, you have a new body, but it's not a gross body like this. It's a subtle body. We can't see Bardo bodies. Ordinary human beings are unable to see Bardo bodies, but it is a kind of like a ghost, we might say, or spirit. So it is a kind of body, but not gross like ours. And this body can travel. It said it can travel instantly to any place it thinks of. Okay, so if you think of Germany, as soon as the thought of Germany comes up, the Bardo body is there. So it doesn't have to get an airplane ticket and spend hours and hours and hours going there. So just by thinking of a place, it can be there. It can also pass through walls. And so there's all these experiences that can occur in the Bardo. And the kind of appearances one has will depend on one's karma. So if there's more negative karma, then the appearances could be frightening, disturbing. But if one has more virtue, good karma, then the appearances could be quite beautiful, pleasant. They say it's like a dream. It's similar to a dream state. So just as we go to sleep at night and we have all these appearances, all these stories, all these adventures, it's like that. Because all these appearances are really coming from the mind. And it's helpful, while we're alive, to train our mind to think that whatever appears to us is not as solid as it appears, but it's coming from our mind. Because then that can help us get through the Bardo without being so disturbed by whatever appears. So the purpose of the bardo is to find another life. It's like a bardo actually means in between. So so it's in between situation between this life and the next life. So the bardo being is searching for a place to be born, wants a new body, new life. And the length of time of being in the bardo is maximum 49 days, but each bardo body only lasts for 7 days, and then it expires. And then you have to, if you haven't yet found a new life within those 7 days, you get a new bardo body. So that can be for a maximum of 7 times. Okay, so every week, every 7 days, you get a new bardo body up to 49 days. Because within 49 days, they say it's definite you will find a new body, a new rebirth, as a human being or as an animal or in one of the other realms. But of course, that depends on your karma, where you are born, which realm you're born in, which also they say we have to have karmic connection with parents. If we're going to be born as a human being, then of course we have to have parents. And there needs to be a karmic connection with those parents. And other factors as well, like, they have to be actually making love, or at least, contributing sperm and egg to a laboratory. Vitro. This is a relatively recent phenomenon, but yeah, it could be that the bardo body goes into the fertilized egg in the laboratory. I don't know. It's not clear. There's a lot of questions about this. I think it's in Venerable's first book that the Dalai Lama talks about this, and he says we don't really know for sure, but you have to investigate when the consciousness goes into the new body. But in the traditional text, they say the maximum amount of time is 49 days. So within that time, then the bardo body will find a new rebirth. And as soon as you find a place of rebirth, the bardo body dies. Consciousness leaves that body and moves into the new, body or fertilized egg, zygote, whatever it is. And then starts developing from there. So this is just a brief explanation of this. If you're interested in knowing more, there's that book by Robert Thurman that I mentioned. There's also this book called Death, Intermediate State, and Rebirth in Tibetan Buddhism. The teachings are by His Holiness and edited by Jeffrey Hopkins with additional information. So this is a very complete explanation of the whole process of dying, going into the intermediate state and a new life. Actually, it's a text, translation of a text with commentary. Well, the cover says Lati Rinpoche and Jeffrey Hopkins. Oh, forward by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Okay, so it is, the forward is teachings by the Dalai Lama, but then the text is a traditional text translated by Jeffrey Hopkins with commentary by Lati Rinpoche. So I think it's on the reading list. Yeah, Lati Rinpoche and Jeffrey Hopkins, Death, Intermediate State, and Rebirth. So later in the meditation session, Venerable Semke will lead a meditation where you can imagine going through these stages and just a little bit of what's happening on each state, finally reaching the clear light. There was a question that came up the other day from someone, can the 8 stages of death also be applied to animals? Has anyone heard? Yeah? I haven't heard that specifically, but I thought, yeah, most probably. Any mind will go through these 8 stages, yeah. And then another question was, the Tibetan Book of the Dead gives guidance on what to do and what not to do in the bardo. Can non-highly realized beings practice in the bardo? Yeah, it's possible, but I think you'd have to do a lot of practice in this lifetime to prepare yourself for it. But yeah, it's possible if you do that. And by the way, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's really meant for people who have trained during their life in certain practices. It's mainly from the Nyingma tradition. So for people who who've learned those practices, are familiar with those practices, trained in them, meditated on them, and so on, then it's recommended that the Tibetan Book of the Dead is read to them as they are dying and after dying. But it's not meant for everybody. I remember once I was in Italy and this young woman her mother was dying, and she really wanted to help her mother, so she read the Tibetan Book of the Dead to her mother. And she was probably a Catholic, and I mean, it could just be disturbing. It could actually cause more disturbance to hear about all these kind of things that happen. And yeah, it doesn't apply to everybody. So anyway, she meant well, and hopefully it didn't have any adverse effects for her mother. But it is important to know that it isn't meant for just anybody and everybody. Another question was, in between rebirths, our minds could go in many directions. What can we do at death to help find our way back to the Dharma? Well, as we were saying yesterday, while we're alive, just cultivate strong refuge in the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, as much as we can every single day. Really make that a strong foundation in our life. And do lots of other virtuous activities, especially practicing ethics and loving kindness and compassion. Learn Dharma as much as you can. Practice it as much as just do as much as you possibly can during your life. And create as much virtue as you can and dedicate it to having a fortunate rebirth, being able to meet the Dharma and continue practicing the Dharma in your future life. So if you do this every day as much as you can, then that's what you can do. And then also the 5 powers that we talked about yesterday. So those are 5 powers. We can use them during our life, but particularly at the time of death, because they include things like purifying our negativities, creating virtue, making strong prayers, aspirations to never be separated from the Dharma, from the three jewels, from bodhicitta, and so on. So that's what we can do. So another question that came up yesterday, somebody wrote in, my awareness does not continue from one life to the next. In this lifetime, I have no awareness or memory of my previous life. In my next, it will be the same, non-awareness of this life. My awareness is gone. The flame shared to a new candle has no memory of life of the previous candle. Again, a physical analogy doesn't work. So where does my awareness go? Does it die? The me I know is gone. So, according to Buddhism, when we use the word awareness, I don't know what this person means by awareness, but for us, the word awareness is synonymous with mind, consciousness. It's always there. It never disappears. It's something changing all the time. It's like a stream, but just like a stream just keeps going, our awareness keeps going. So each moment, a moment of experience or awareness arises and then it ceases, but it doesn't completely go out of existence. It never goes out of existence. It just transforms into the next moment. And then that moment transforms into the next one, that into the next one, that into the next one. Just continuously, all during our life, whether we're awake or asleep, whether we're conscious or unconscious in a coma. Then we come to the end of our life, and our awareness continues going through these 8 stages. So at these 8 stages we just looked at, there's a continuous flow of awareness. It's changing. We're gradually losing touch with this life, not seeing, not hearing, forgetting everything from this life. But there's still awareness there, continuing and having different kinds of experiences, right up to the clear light, the most subtle level of mind. We stay there for a little while, and then when it's time to leave this body, the clear light goes back through the 8 stages. And again, this is awareness, continuously, all through our life, all through the process of dying, through the bardo, into the next life. It never stops. So this isn't, according to Buddhism, this is not correct to say our awareness does not continue from one life to the next. But perhaps what the person means is the normal awareness that we have, like today, I am Sangye Kado sitting in Sravasti Abbey, looking at all my brothers and sisters and talking about Dharma and so on. That awareness that we have right now, if you think that is going to continue after death, no. Okay, it changes. Even during our life, it changes. For example, when we fall asleep, right? Most people, except some people, are able to maintain awareness of what's going on while they're asleep and dreaming. That's called lucid dreaming. But most of us, I don't know about you, but me, my awareness disappears as soon as I fall asleep. And then it appears again when I wake up. But it's still there during the time I'm asleep. There's still awareness there. It's having dreams, sometimes in a non-dream sleep, but there's still awareness there, even if it's just very, very deep and subtle. So it never ceases. And also, it sounds like this person thinks that because I don't have awareness of my previous life, then in my next life I won't have awareness of this life. Well, that may be true for probably most of us. Most of us don't remember previous lives. But that's not true for everybody. There are people who have memories, sometimes very clear, vivid, detailed memories of their previous lives. And it's even possible that those memories can be verified independently. You can find that, yeah, what they're talking about really happened. There really was such a person who did this and that and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So most of us don't have that kind of awareness, and then people sometimes use that to say, oh, well, if there was a rebirth, I should be able to remember my past life. Since I don't, then it doesn't exist. But is that a valid reason? Because if it was, then our childhood didn't exist. Because most of us don't remember, well, maybe later childhood, but early childhood. Being a baby in your mother's arms, drinking milk from her breast. Do you remember that? I think most people don't. Okay, so then it didn't happen. We don't remember it, therefore it didn't happen. All right, so that's not a valid reason. Just because we don't remember something isn't proof that it didn't happen. What did you eat for lunch last Tuesday? No, don't ask her. We have to remember it. We have to remember it ourselves. Okay, I don't remember. So that means I didn't eat lunch last Tuesday because I don't remember. So that's not a valid reason, right? Otherwise it would be ridiculous. We'd have these ridiculous consequences that, everything we don't remember didn't happen. That means a person with dementia, with Alzheimer's, didn't have a life. Right? Because they don't remember any of it. So, just because we don't remember doesn't prove it didn't happen. There are people who remember, and we too can remember if we develop our minds, if we develop a more clear mind, a more concentrated mind, we too can start having more memories of the past. So, think about it. And I guess related to this, to another question somebody had asked, how do Buddhists know there is rebirth? Well, this is how we know, because there are people who can remember, people who've developed their minds who can remember and give information about past lives. and the whole process of dying and being reborn. So we trust we trust the Buddha, and we trust all the other people who've had these experiences. And I mean, the Buddha did say, check for yourself. And if we're willing to put in the time and energy that it takes to develop our mind, we can verify it for ourselves. But if you don't want to put in that time and energy and just sit on your couch in front of the TV and say, oh, there's no rebirth, I don't remember my past life, you're not even willing to try to explore that possibility, then, well, what can we do? But even without our own first-hand experiences, there are lots of other experiences, lots of books available. For example, Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychology professor at University of Virginia, and he spent most of his life, at least 40 years, maybe more, doing research on past lives. And he collected thousands of cases from all over the world of people who remembered their past lives. And one of his colleagues, I think his name is Jim Tucker, he's a younger man, he's carried on the work. Yeah. So it's good to at least explore these cases and see for yourself if they seem reasonable or not.
And like with the question that also almost the same as this, that came up yesterday about proof, not having proof for rebirth, but wouldn't the existence of our present awareness, our present mind itself, doesn't that function as proof for rebirth? If like you're able to connect the connection between a consciousness arising at this moment that it necessarily arose from a previous continuum, from a previous moment of consciousness, like wouldn't that, I think like Dharmakirti maybe in the Pramanavartika Karika kind of uses that line of reasoning to really, like make a proof for rebirth.
I don't know, but it seems that scientists, I'm not a scientist, I haven't studied science, but they, at least some of them, seem totally convinced that consciousness is simply produced by the brain activity. And there is connection between things that we experience and things that happen in our brain. But then they take that to conclude that consciousness depends on the brain. It arises from the brain. And I'm not knowledgeable enough to be able to refute that. But to me, it's just a theory rather than an absolute fact. But what happens with people, I think ordinary people, is they hear a scientist saying something like that, and they just buy into it. They just believe it, like blind faith. People tend to have blind faith in science. And they criticize religious people for having blind faith in the Bible or the Quran or sutras. Oh, you're just believing that stuff. There's no proof for it. But then nowadays, people just have blind faith in science. If a scientist said something, oh, it must be true. Full stop. Somebody once told me that many, or maybe most, of the scientists who were awarded the Nobel Prize for their work was later disproved. I don't know if that's true or not, but it does happen, right? Science will say something, and this is how it is. And then some years later, oh, no, we made a boo-boo. It's not like that. It's like this. Yeah. So they don't have all the answers. We tend to think, many people tend to think science knows everything. They have all the answers. Whatever they say is absolute truth. That is blind faith. Yeah. So we should at least be skeptical and not just buy into whatever anyone says, even if it's a professor, somebody with a PhD and won the Nobel Prize. Not necessarily true. We're still exploring. Anyway, so I'm not sure if Dharmakirti's logic would work for one of these scientists, but we're trying. There are scientists.
Not a single one who's ever looked at it, to tell you the truth.
Sorry?
There's probably not a single one who's ever looked at it, to be perfectly honest.
Well, there are these scientists who are having discussions with the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, but they don't actually study the texts.
Oh.
Not even basic logic.
He's saying scientists, there's no scientist who's actually studied Dharmakirti, because Dharmakirti and Pramanavartika presents logical proof for rebirth based on one moment of consciousness rising from the previous one and giving rise to the next one. So this is the proof, basically. But yeah, I don't know if any scientist has actually explored that.
Many questions coming in.
I'm sure there are. But I did want to talk a little, I don't know, should we just skip the section about helping other people who are dying? Because we only have 20 minutes left. What do we do? Questions or helping people who are dying? I mean, there is a section in the little booklet, which everybody can get a PDF of. A section about helping others who are dying, and lots of other books as well, both from the Buddhist point of view and Western point of view about helping people who are dying. So should we just skip that? Do questions? No? How to make everybody happy? Well, let's just quickly go through. I'll just quickly go through the points. Because it is a huge subject. I mean, we could spend a whole weekend just on this. So these are just some things that I've come to on my own, but also from other sources. So the first point mentioned here, this is letter G in the outline, helping others who are dying. What happened? Go on. Okay. So the first point is working on our own emotions. And that itself is another whole subject. But the point is, if we really want to help somebody who's dying, we need to know how to manage our mind, our emotions, because there's a good chance that emotions will come up. Fear is a common one. Just, somebody dying is confronting us with our own mortality. And if we haven't dealt with that, if we're still terrified of death, unable to deal with death, how can we help somebody else who's dying? So we need to learn to work on our own fear. And then sadness and grief, especially if the person is someone we're close to, someone who's important to us. We don't want them to go, and so that could come up and disturb our mind. So we need to at least learn how to manage our emotions. That doesn't mean becoming cold like a robot, a machine, but at least know how to manage your emotions. And I did include a whole section, which we don't have time to go through, but you can do that on your own. A section on methods for working on disturbing emotions so that you can at least keep them, I don't like to say under control, but at least not totally overwhelming your mind and you just lose it. Okay, so that's one thing we need to do. And number 2, giving hope and finding forgiveness. This is something from Sogyo Rinpoche's book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Because he says at the time of death, people can sometimes feel a lot of regret for wrongs that they've done, mistakes that they've made. And, I'm such a bad person. I did all these horrible things, and they may feel fear of what's going to happen to them as a result of what they did. And they believe in God. They may think, oh, God, he won't forgive me. He'll punish me. So it's very important to help the person get out of that state of mind in case they're in it. So, talk about forgiveness and how the nature of God or the nature of Buddha or the nature of the universe is forgiveness. There is forgiveness for whatever we've done, no matter what we've done. There is forgiveness available. We just need to forgive ourselves. That's the hard thing, forgiving ourselves for what we've done. But try to talk to the person to help them get to that point of feeling forgiveness. And you could encourage them to make apologies if that's possible. The people they've offended are still there. They could send a letter or a message of apology. And hope that you're not going to just go to hell or suffer forever and ever and ever for your sins. That you can get beyond this negativity you're stuck in and feel that you can change. Even on your deathbed, you can still change. So in the book it says, all religions stress the power of forgiveness, and this power is never more necessary, more deeply felt than when someone is dying. Through forgiving and being forgiven, we purify ourselves of the darkness of what we have done and prepare ourselves more completely for the journey through death. Another thing that's helpful is to remind the person of positive things that they've done. They might be only focusing on their mistakes and their, harmful actions, but, have them remember the good things they've done, all the good that they've done. And that will help to uplift them. So basically, that's just helping a person get out of a hopeless, negative state of mind into a more positive one. And then helping spiritually will depend on the person's beliefs. If the person is a Buddhist, find out what kind of practices they did during their life and remind them of those practices, encourage them to do those practices with the person so that they're able to die with those practices and ideas in their mind. That's a short version of that. But if the person isn't a Buddhist, you need to respect whatever religious beliefs they do have and talk to them in those terms. If they're a Christian, a Catholic, then talk to them about Jesus, Mary, God, the saints. Remind them of their religious beliefs and practices and help them. Like Venerable Chunyi mentioned, Buddhist nun reciting Christian psalms to, who was it that was dying? A friend.
Hospice.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so talk or pray or recite whatever is according to the person's beliefs, and never, ever, ever try to change them. Try to push your belief. It does happen, unfortunately, but yeah, that's completely wrong from the Buddhist point of view. That's just going to create confusion and maybe anger and a disturbed state of mind. So you want them to be in a positive state of mind. So if they had religious practices and beliefs during their life and they can be reminded of that at the time of death, then that will help them be in a positive state. And if the person is not religious, then you could still talk to them about some of these ideas, but without religious language. You could use the language of psychology or the language of everyday life. The bottom line is trying to help the person be in a positive state of mind. Peaceful, calm, relaxed, not fearful, not angry. So just do whatever you can to bring that about. But you also have to accept you may not be able to do that. It's not up to you. Even if you were Buddha, you couldn't change somebody else's mind. Each person is responsible for their own mind. And all you can do is try, say things, do things that will hopefully help bring about a positive state of mind, but there's no guarantee that that will happen. And if it doesn't happen, you are not to blame. It's not your fault. That's really important to understand, because people sometimes feel, oh, they were angry when they died. I couldn't help them. Oh, I failed. Or even, I did the wrong thing. So it's not your fault. You're going into this with a positive motivation. You really do want to help. You do what you can. And that's all you can do. So you just have to accept your limitations. And then it's also another thing that can be done is on the spiritual level is accumulating merit and dedicating merit. So it's said that if you do have access to the person's money, like if you're a family member and you have the right to use some of their money, you can use some of their money to do virtue, like to make offerings, make donations, liberate animals. That's actually something that's done in Asia. Buying animals that are going to be slaughtered and set them free, liberate them. So that's a really virtuous thing to do. So if you're doing that with the person's own money and dedicating it to their peaceful death and good rebirth, then that's another thing that you can do. And of course, making prayers and getting other people, lamas, monasteries, monks, and others to do prayers. So that can also help to ripen their good karma, their virtuous karma, so they can have a good rebirth in the next life. So those are just a few points in brief. And again, there's more in the book, little booklet, and also many other books about death and dying, and too much material to cover here. Maybe we could take a couple of questions, as long as they're relevant to what we've been talking about.
Okay. Someone says, my late teacher said that we should be very careful about taking organs for transplant because the dying mind is still in the body and can be shocked into fear and negative rebirths. What do you think?
Yeah, this is one of those controversial topics. There are different answers. So some teachers will say like this, that it would be harmful if the body is, because you have to take the organs out. I think after the breath is stopped, what's the point? The breath is stopped, but you have to do it quickly. You can't wait for 3 days or even a few hours, right? It has to be done very fast. So that means the consciousness, according to the 8 stages, the consciousness could still be in the body, and it could be disturbed by this kind of activity. So some teachers say like that, better not to do it because it might disturb the mind and cause the mind to become in a negative state, and that would affect their rebirth. But I heard other teachers say that if the person has decided they want to donate their organs to others to give them a chance of a longer life, that is such a virtuous thing. That's a really virtuous state of mind. Yeah. And so that would be the dominant karma at the time of death. Think, okay, they're going to come and take my organs, my liver, my kidney, my eyes, and this will benefit those people. So it's such a virtuous state of mind. That would overpower any possible disturbance that might occur if the body is disturbed. And then there's also this whole thing about how on the 4th stage, there is no longer any physical sensations. So they wouldn't feel, when the mind would no longer feel pain. So I don't know, there's no one answer that everybody gives, and I guess each person has to decide on their own what they want to do. And also as practitioners, we work on overcoming attachment to our body. So if you've done a lot of work on that and you no longer regard this body as me and have a lot of attachment to it and just feel happy about the idea of your body becoming useful for others, then I think, again, less chance that would affect your next life, your rebirth. Maybe just one more question, because we do have to stop early today. Maybe a few more.
Okay, this question is from Venerable Losong. It's actually two in one. He asks, can simulating these stages of death unintentionally cause one's own death? And can someone go through stages 1 through 4 of dissolution, reverse, and survive? Dissolution, reverse, and survive.
So the first question was, is it possible that if you simulate this, you might accidentally die? I don't think so, because a person who has that ability, that level of mental strength and power to be able to actually simulate it. I mean, when we meditate on it, like you'll be doing next, we're just kind of pretending to have these experiences. But a highly accomplished yogi of highest yoga tantra is actually able to make these things happen. But I think a person at that level of practice would know what they're doing and wouldn't make that kind of boo-boo. But I have heard, just related to this is another topic, that the practice of poa, some of you may have heard of. Poa means transference. So to do POA practice, you have to first receive a certain kind of initiation, empowerment, and instructions and training in this practice. But the idea of this practice is learning how to shoot your consciousness out of your body and to a pure land, like Amitabha's Pure Land. Okay, so you train in this practice while you're alive, and then the point is, at the time of death, you'll be able to just eject and go to the Pure Land. But they do say that you shouldn't do this practice too much during your life. You should just do the basic amount of training, but not overdo it. Otherwise, there is the danger that you could bring about an untimely death. So that's maybe a little similar to that. But I have never heard that with regard to the meditating on the 8 stages. So the second part was, I forget.
Can someone go through stages 1 through 4 of dissolution, reverse, and survive?
Well, I was wondering about that because the question came up the other day about near-death experiences and at what point is the person in these stages. And I was thinking that it could be past the 4th stage because to all appearances, the person has died. There's no more breathing, no more bodily functions, heart, brain, and so on. So they could be past the 4th stage, maybe in one of the later 4 stages, and then they come back. So it does seem that it is possible. That's something that happens kind of accidentally, usually. I don't think anybody deliberately induces a near-death experience, but yeah, so it seems that it is possible. I don't know about you.
In my nursing career, there was a time when a woman died on the unit, and she was pronounced. There was no breathing, no any signs of life. We were actually starting to put her in a body bag. That's what you do, and then take them to the morgue. And she sat up, and she came back and was wondering what the heck we were doing. So, so yes, it's very possible.
I've even heard of, bodies already in the morgue and knocking, yeah, so it is possible. So what do you think? Should we stop there? Because somebody wanted to make announcements. Is that right? Do we dedicate first or? Yeah. So, yeah, we didn't have time to go into all the details of this material and answer all the questions. But maybe, yeah, if you've sent in questions, perhaps, I can try to send replies if we have their email addresses. But anyway, it's good, to hear about this material and stir up a lot of questions. Hopefully you'll continue having curiosity and explore more on your own of this material. Like I said, there's lots of books, lots of material, lots of courses you can go into. And the most important thing I hope that you can take away from this weekend is just seeing the need to do some practice. Start working on your mind. At least start. Yeah, you can't do everything that was mentioned, but at least start doing some practice to make yourself acquainted with more positive states of mind. At least kindness, compassion, ethics. Get more and more familiar with those as preparation for the time of death, so there's a greater chance of having positive thoughts and feelings and virtue, good karma in our mind at the time of death. That's the most important thing. Start with that, and then, the other things, more esoteric things, you're going to add on to later, but that's not so important right now.